Hello, I'm Stuart Crainer. Welcome to this series of webinars brought to you by the Business Ecosystem Alliance. Our aim with the Alliance is to further knowledge of the ideas behind and best practice of business ecosystems. So thank you very much for joining us. Please let us know your thoughts, insights, questions and observations in the chat box during the session. Today we're joined by Andrea Kates. San Francisco based, Andrea was CEO of the San Francisco software company that pioneered the application of lean startup. For 20 years, she's led bold initiatives in virtually every sector and every geography that help companies figure out where to place their bets on emerging products, services, and technologies, and to scale dynamic business models. Today, Andrea will provide a practical framework for matching the type of ecosystem that matters with a roadmap to optimize impact. She will share original tools from our newly minted masterclass series, Get to Next, and outline some brilliant success stories based on recent projects she's led. So this will be a deeply practical session. We have a lot to get through. Welcome, Andrea. Let's get started and let's start talking about high impact ecosystems. You've got a very carefully organized presentation you're going to run through, and I'm going to kind of interject when I can add value in whatever way that might be. And we kick off by talking about the broader context of ecosystems and their worth and place in the working world as you see it. Andrea, over to you.
It's so great to be in conversation with you and to be with the community, because this is probably the most important topic that becomes either A, a buzzword if done wrong, or B, literally the most powerful tool to multiply impact for companies. I think it's misunderstood. Ecosystems are bandied about in terms of a term, but I think that the work that's being done here is so important, and very pleased to continue the learning journey with everyone. As Stuart, as you mentioned, we'll be talking about the context first, but we'll also, over the course of this time, talk about 3 different flavors, which I've minted to help leaders figure out what to do. We all know that we should be thinking about ecosystems, and we do something either very academic and we plot them, or we do something very spontaneous and we start getting people engaged. But ultimately, we need a good blend. And so I've organized it into what I call 3 flavors. Then I'll give a deeper dive into a couple of very practical examples from clients that I've worked with and projects that I've worked with over the last probably 10 years. And then there are 3 really important strategies we'll share toward the end. And the final part is, what can we do? We will end with everyone being able to share an action you'll take or something that you will do Monday morning to really start to apply the power of high impact ecosystems. And so to your point, how did we get here contextually? What is an ecosystem? I know that this community is well versed in it. Here's my take. Context. The most important thought for leaders is to understand, people say things like, oh, it's the network effect, or, oh, it's a supply chain or a value chain. No, ecosystems are not simply networks on steroids. And to succeed and really sustain momentum and value, ecosystems need completely different leadership skills than we were taught. It is not simply a matter of doing what we were doing faster, better, bigger in a network way, but it's really allowing players who are not even in our control to have independent and also interdependent relationships with us, and it multiplies rather dramatically. This worked from about a decade ago when I wrote Find Your Next, and the center of that was understanding that strategy, the way we were taught in business school, like with SWOT analysis and some of the standard ways we were taught tools, were not embracing cross-industry realities. So the truth was that we were learning more from companies on the edges of our own industry. So if we were benchmarking as a bank against another bank, we might be the fastest snail in a snail race. We should probably be benchmarking against people in other industries who had more innovative initiatives rather than benchmarking against ourselves. And then 10 years later, I'm working with Find Your Next. As Stuart, as you mentioned, it's an end-to-end system to help leaders understand how to engage and activate the initiatives. And I'll tell you why. Because as you mentioned, I was leading a software company in Silicon Valley that was the home for 13,000 teams of about 4 people. So that's a lot of people. And the sad part was we were envisioning, we were expanding, we were building, we were doing lean startup, we were doing design thinking, we were doing all of these great initiatives, but we were giving birth to orphans. We didn't know how to scale them beyond a certain point. We didn't know how to get buy-in from within our companies and also within a broader, as I said, ecosystem of unfamiliar players. And so this entire decade has been devoted to figuring out what went wrong. How do we achieve escape velocity non-linearly? We're not going to get into math and physics today, but there is this notion of something that has a butterfly effect, where something we do has an anticipated or unanticipated opportunity for someone else in our ocean. And how do we create scale for ourselves and also have a system that rests on trust and the rising tide lifting many, many ships? The experience that I had 10 years ago sits with me now when I worked with Allstate Insurance. And we were looking at developing a B2C, not just a B2B2C or a sales that was through salespeople. And we were looking at digital innovation at the time. And if you think about the ecosystem that you need for that network in that time, yes, of course, we knew we had to look at other insurance companies. But what we really needed to understand was the whole ecosystem around companies like Zappos that had online shoes and had this wonderful ecosystem already developed of customer experience. What could we in the insurance company learn from that experience? So we need to go from network to ecosystem. We'll talk about it quite a bit in this session. And for the example I just gave, we needed to understand an entire ecosystem, not just a partner, not just a player, not just a participant, not a node, but the connections between the nodes. What are all of the things that our agile product partners were able to do, that app developers did? At that time, we didn't know anything about the ecosystem of app developers. What does customer success support really look like? So those kinds of lessons are ways that I would distinguish a network from an ecosystem. And once again, I won't get into the details today, but I learned the same thing at OnStar when I was working with General Motors. We decided that we wanted our app, it wasn't an app at the time, but our technology to be able to not just connect to drivers, but to connect drivers who were in an accident with first responders in hospitals. Well, we knew nothing about the infrastructure, HIPAA, the requirements for hospitals. What do first responders do? How do they map things? So we needed to really learn about their flywheels and their ecosystems for our ecosystem to thrive. The simplest example is Airbnb. We know that they have obviously homeowners as part of an ecosystem and a flywheel that they control, perhaps, they're part of Airbnb. But imagine adjacent or not directly related ecosystems. What goes on in the ecosystem of cleaning services in every single location that Airbnb doesn't control, but they are really synergistic, right? If you get it right, everybody can grow. And let's imagine, I'll give an example later of this mindset multiplying many ways. And so to me, an ecosystem has participants, if you need a definition, who are contributors, that have flywheels, that have interdependence as well as independence. And in a moment, we'll talk about the 3 flavors: the profit, the platform, and the purpose. And so what we do better in an ecosystem than a traditional value chain or network, we can have radical impact. And I would take a picture of this slide because there's definitely time for us to have deeper dives in all of this content because I know there's a lot. Radical impact. Collectively uncovering emerging customer needs. The power of data right now, as I'll share with you later about Rappi, is incredible. We can get so much closer to so many more people's needs and uncover needs they can't even articulate because of ecosystems. It's a force multiplier for trust, or if you don't do it, not trust. It's sustained loyalty. So you start an ecosystem, but what usually happens is they die or wither over time, or some people feel well served and others don't. And then, of course, with technology, whether it's AI or other technologies, we can advance so quickly in serving the needs. And I won't go into the details of this, but companies like Cargill that understood that stevia used to be based on agriculture. Now they learned how to ferment it. So maybe they need to develop, I made this one up, but maybe they need to develop knowledge about and relationships with an ecosystem with people who produce beer, who know a lot about fermentation, right? So it's unlikely ecosystems that people miss the point of. They keep building ecosystems based on old-fashioned sort of strategic mindset where our peers are in our ecosystems, our supply chains. But really the power comes from this type of cross-industry deep dive. And so it's even more impact than a network effect.
So Andrea, ecosystems are not networks on steroids. I think you've made that clear. We don't want to be the fastest snail in the snail race. Where does that metaphor go? If you don't want to be the fastest snail in the snail race, well, you don't want to be the fastest snail in the snail race when there's a Formula One race you should be part of, perhaps.
Well, actually, there's a new race, right? We can't see it because it's the old line, if you ask the fish how's the water, the fish is like, what's water? We can't see our context. So in a moment, I'll share an example that I love that Mayo Clinic did when there was this overnight realization that the snail race that they were in was a hospital-based snail race for healthcare. And I'm not saying snail race in a bad way. That was their reality. It's not trying to be insulting at all. However, the new race that everyone could obviously see, because it was so easy to see with COVID, unfortunately, was home healthcare was the new snail race, the new race. So instead of being a snail in a snail race and being fast, right, like a hospital being a hospital, suddenly what we needed to optimize for during COVID was home healthcare. As I said, I'll tell that story in a moment. And so that's a new race. And just like with fermentation, that's like a new taking off of the blinders of which ecosystems do we need to connect with and invent relationships with and imagine with together to really be in a different race altogether.
We've got people joining us from Colombia, Portugal, Switzerland, America, the UK, Indonesia. Thank you everyone for joining us. A couple of quick comments. Tammy Madsden says, sustained, it needs to be generative. Thank you, Tammy. Frank Carlberg says, can you please provide examples of methods to uncover emerging user needs?
Oh, this is great. This is the perfect tee up. Tammy, it's great to see you. Tammy, by the way, has written a fantastic book on ecosystems, which I recommend to everybody. It is a fantastic use case for ecosystem development and leadership. She's absolutely right. First of all, it's generative. Once again, we could get into the math of this, but it's like you go from A to B, and B is very different, right? And B defines what C is, and C defines what D might be. And then the null set, what are we missing? And you'll see this in the Rappi example. What are we missing that the data is hinting at that no one has articulated yet? And that is absolutely generative. And so the reason that you can't, I mean, a lot of my clients on day one say, can we map out a 5-year plan for our ecosystem? No, we cannot, because recursive, generative, I don't mean to use these, buzzwords, but, it is definitely that you see where you are, and then you say, wait a minute, you'll see in home healthcare. Okay, so now we figured out home healthcare, but wait a minute, who's going to go and visit all of these homes? We have nurses and doctors who know how to work in a hospital setting, and we have machines that are engineered for a hospital setting. How in the heck are we going to make that machine little enough to be in Andrea's bedroom if she needs diabetes monitoring? How are we going to connect it with apps? So you're absolutely right. And then Frank, to your, the coolest thing we're going to talk about, I think, is emerging available market. How we see what is in plain view, but not defined yet.
Tammy, don't be modest. Please tell us the title of your book. Put it in the chat so everyone can seek it out. So tell us about the free flavors then, Andrea.
Well, this is it took, I posted something on LinkedIn this morning where it, like e pluribus unum, like out of many, one. So this is out of many, three. I thought, okay, what are the actual ways that we can practically act? Because I'm all about engaging leaders to act and set priorities differently, to say, what are we optimizing for? So here's something that I am a little bit controversial about. I'm not being judgy, but I just want to give three perspectives on how we really think about ecosystems. These are not mutually exclusive, nor are they exhaustive. When I first started running the software company, we needed to worry about profit, for sure. My insurance client, we need to worry about profit, right? I'm a United States citizen. I'm a capitalist. We think about profit. Okay. And so the way that ecosystems used to be drawn 10 years ago when I led workshops like Get to Next workshops, it was basically, we were the circle, we were the circle, and we would draw our, quote, ecosystem. In those days, I remember, God, it might have been 15 years ago, I worked with the Royal Dutch Shell, and we were doing a lot of work with the network economy. There was a book that came out, and we were network economy. So we always drew ourselves first, right? And we joke now that these were ego systems because we were in the middle. And it was based on profit, and that's fine. Our supply chain members, and I'm not saying that is not an ecosystem. That is one flavor of ecosystem. The second is platform, where we are, as I said, when I ran the software company, we wanted to be interoperable with other platforms. And this is the way a lot of ecosystems, if you think about, everything in China, I felt it was platform-based, the WeChat or whatever, there's a whole ecosystem, and you'll see in a few examples how that works. And then purpose-driven, and the concept that there's a higher purpose to service home healthcare post-COVID was, we don't know how we're going to do it, but the why was different from just profit. So let me show you how that works. Profit-based, the simple strategy is that it's supply chain, value chain, our products and services. And we're mostly familiar with this. A lot of times it is kind of a glorified network, to be honest. The way we talk about it, though, is as an ecosystem. And you can, in fact, spin a lot of different flywheels that you don't control to have an ecosystem based on your own profit. You can have a resilient supply chain as part of this, creative technologies that are really interesting ecosystems on their own. You can create efficiencies. I'm not judging this. I'm defining it as a flavor. So this is where one lens is, are we being profitable? Another framing is, as I mentioned, software, interoperability, a seamless experience. However, usually, in a couple of examples I'll show now, if you're on Microsoft, you're probably not on Apple. They interoperate within their own Venn diagrams, but not necessarily, you might have a clunky experience jumping from platform to platform. However, these are, of course, ecosystems. There's an ecosystem that Maersk did in a decarbonization hub, where they don't control everybody in this community, but they have a role to play. There is ABB Ability. There are lots and lots of platforms. GE has one as well. I have a feeling, although I don't know, that if you're on ABB Ability, you're not on GE. They're sort of different. And yet they have accommodated a mindset of ecosystem. And then you have something like Google Play. I did a workshop last week with a person from Google, and I didn't realize they have 1 million developers. That's amazing. They don't control them, although there are ways that they develop system standards, sometimes proactively, sometimes based on observation. So this is a way of looking at an ecosystem of platform. And what I'm going to share in just a moment is the ecosystem of purpose, where you have this big challenge. COVID happened. People can't come to hospital, period. End of fact. That is a fact. Big challenge. We can either ignore it or we can do something about it. I'm working with a company in Japan now that's working with societal challenge around tsunamis and how to have emergency response. There can be a significant why. I'm working with Copenhagen FinTech. I always love to give them credit. They're a fantastic ecosystem based in Copenhagen and in the Nordics and Denmark that does a significant why, a bigger reason for existing. And so a purpose-driven ecosystem begins with a bold collective vision. That's how it begins. We'll talk about how it maintains and sustains and grows. So this is the first example. I hope all of us can relate. This is particularly relevant to leaders who have to optimize around a new reality. So we can generalize this even if we're not in healthcare. So new reality, COVID hits. Hospitals are not either safe or appropriate or accessible. So they said we have to move from a hospital network to a whole home-based healthcare system. Why? They have embraced not the golden rule, which is do unto others as you want done to you, but the platinum rule, which is do unto others as they would want done to them. I almost cry when I hear this because I find it so compelling and amazing that an organization would be based on this. And so based on that why, they committed $500 million US as their initial investment to not only solve home healthcare, but realized that they would never get there alone fast enough or well enough. And they knew an ecosystem was the only way. And I will call this one, I don't want to worry about nomenclature and categorization, but I would call this one an ecosystem of purpose. Of course, there's platform and profit involved. Number one, they collaborated with Kaiser Permanente, which is a competitor. They also run hospitals. They also realized that for them to make the true ecosystem, the infrastructure and the interoperability, and the infrastructure is like as a noun. I'm thinking more of the relationships, the verbs, the ways that technology really works. They had to have home monitoring. They had to have devices. They had to have apps. They needed people to go make home visits. They made an unprecedented set of relationships, and they also had to work with the regulators because home healthcare wasn't even paid for by the United States healthcare system at the time. A doctor could be sitting giving a very important, informed diagnosis, and it was not reimbursed. So of course, hospitals knew they had to have ecosystem or flywheel relationships interoperating with patients in a brand new way. Government, because the regulations and the HIPAA in our case, the privacy laws. Healthcare professionals who are used to working in hospital. Talent flywheels, people who are well versed in things that were not hospital based. Insurance and payments. It's just a nightmare to think about how you switch from payment system 1 to 2. But what's really cool is they also had to come up with people who were doing, this is the snail race concept, right? What other races that were either adjacent to or complementary to what home healthcare needed to become could they do? So people like Peloton. Now I'm fictionalizing this. This is not what Mayo did, but Peloton already had home bicycles and home trainers, right? Could there be some elements of learning and or collaboration with a company like Peloton and a whole ecosystem of what happens with home-based healthcare? Home visitors. There were people who were doing home visitors for all kinds of other reasons. So for instance, might they, and once again, I'm fictionalizing this, this is not part of the actual story, but Best Buy in the US has Geek Squad that used to go out and help Andrea set up my PC, my home computer. We kind of don't need that anymore, but might those people be repurposed and other retailers as a Geek Squad for home healthcare? Might they be trained to monitor my diabetes home device? So that's the first thought, is these three concepts, is profit, platform, and purpose.
Three neat flavors. Michael Reben has got an interesting point. How do you tell the difference between a real ecosystem and a fake one in the early stages? Let's say
that's really good.
A network dressed up as an ecosystem. And he says that especially applies to purpose ecosystems, as in your home care example.
Okay, I love this, Michael. This is a brilliant question. It's the same as greenwashing. right? Where in the beginning, ESG looks really well-intentioned. And I have seen, I'm sure you have as well, hundreds, if not thousands of ESG, some are real, some are greenwashed. I'll tell you what my sniff test is. If everyone in the room is literally from the same organization in the organizing days, then it's probably not a bet. I'm not being judgmental. We have to make profit, but it's probably a value chain. If most of the agenda is dominated by one player and the questions go something like, how will you all fit in with our vision? Then it's probably a platform, there's kind of, I don't know if this is true or not, but I imagine that Google doesn't say, Andrea, you can do whatever code you want, use any kind of graphics, do any, no worries. Absolutely. There's probably a set of standards that are created by Google, I'm assuming, right? And so if I want to play the platform game, that is different. For a purpose-driven one, and there's lots and lots of examples, it's who's in the meeting and how people feel when they come out and what happens next. So they all look the same on paper. And Michael, I love that question. Would love to hear more about that. Would love to, chat more about that.
Can we just do a quick question from Matt Simmons, the Matt Simmons, I believe. Andrea, are high impact ecosystems able to address the need to blend open strategy into complex adaptive systems?
Oh, this is that Matt Simmons. Okay, that's fantastic. Yes, and this is where I'm really sorry that I didn't end up with my PhD in artificial intelligence or expert systems design years ago. So what happens, and to Tammy's point, like there's a moment where it gets really complex, right? So in math, as we know, like there's multivariate analysis where you can kind of see what's happening, right? It's sort of like linear in a way, even though it's complex. But what happens in ecosystems, when you talk about butterfly effect, you set up a need. So let's imagine, I'll just use Airbnb and the cleaners. It's not, it's a very simple example. But imagining that the house cleaning services in one domain, one country, are very different from a sanitation requirement than another, right? Well, Airbnb can't control that, but suddenly you've set forth a whole series of requirements within someone else's ecosystem, which can be a lot of friction, right? And actually say, well, you can't go to country X anymore because, we can't adhere to the standards. So there's complexity in every single aspect, right? When I drew those flywheels, if you try to get it into a control mentality, you'll be really frustrated because you can't control. It's like chaos theory. However, that doesn't mean that you can't do what I'll suggest in a moment, which is pulse checks. There are ways to read data and step back as a collective set of leaders and say, what are we learning from what we're seeing, and how might we accommodate an unstated need that we're seeing? And you'll see in my Rappi example how that works.
Okay, so we've looked at context, we've looked at the free flavors, and we're gonna have some more about butterflies in a minute, I think, Andrea.
We will, because you can't talk about ecosystems without butterfly effect. Okay, so this is one of my favorite examples, and there's somebody from Colombia, and so you might recognize this. Some of my friends, I've worked in Colombia. I'm still trying to get to Medellin. Hello, friends. But this is an example from a company in Colombia, and thank you to Guido Becher, who gave me permission to share this story. And so in 2015, there were 8 people begging for people to sign up, and if Andrea signed up for my app, I would get a donut. So that was a big incentive. Their service was called Rappi, and it was a way of delivering sandwiches on bicycles. And this is a true story. Today, they have 100 million downloads, which I know in China is not a lot, but it's a lot for a company like that's starting out. In 9 countries, 40,000 connected businesses, and a $7 billion valuation. So I'll tell the story of how this worked, because to me, there are elements we can all learn about a high impact ecosystem that is truly what Matt said. It's complex, but it's also manageable, right? I mean, it can grow with a great leadership, but you can't skip any of the elements that I'm about to share. So trust is the first thing. And to I think it was Michael's point about how you know if it's a real one. Was it Michael who asked, how do you know if it's a real ecosystem or just sort of a greenwashing? That was my term. So here's the thing. People know trust. They can smell trust. They can smell distrust. They can tell. Before this, I said to Stuart, are my slides too salesy? Like, I don't want to be pitching Andrea, right? So you need to understand that tone matters because it shows you're authentic, where you're coming from. Here's the story. True story. Guido Becher has a son. His son left his cleats home for his, we call it soccer, they call it football game. And so in the traffic in Bogota, you can just imagine, it's like, I'm never going to be able to satisfy my son. He's going to be unable to do his sport after school. He'll be crying. I don't like that. So they had something called Rappi Favor. He got on Rappi Favor, which is an app, and he said, can anybody in this neighborhood deliver these cleats to my son at school X? And, I don't know what it's like in your part of the world. I live in San Francisco. I'm not sure I would trust a lot of people to do this, but sure enough, a person said, absolutely, delivered the shoes. Do you think Guido was excited? Yes. Trust was there. It was proven. Okay. So Guido was also in charge of customer experience for part of Rappi. And it's a longer story. I'll shorten it to a 3-point story. So here's what he determined, to the point of uncovering, to Matt's point of uncovering, seeing the complexity, but being able to uncover an unmet need. So this is a true story. They determined that if Andrea ordered sushi for lunch and it came on a bicycle, that I was also likely to buy what? My marketing 101, my MBA teaches me, try to sell Andrea a drink. Maybe some, matcha or something like that. Great. Absolutely true. That's a no-brainer. That's an inside my snail race example. Different snail race. And this is a true story, to be able, and I'm going to make up the numbers because I'm not 100% sure, but let's say that sushi was $8. They were able to discern that Andrea actually had a hidden desire to go to Tokyo. And they figured out, they had my trust, that I would buy an airplane ticket for, let's say, $800. And it wasn't intruding on my privacy. It was actually welcomed by me. I was so pleased to be able to have them understand that I had an unmet need for an airplane ticket, even though I had ordered sushi. I will show you how this turns out. That is the secret of understanding. You look at the data and you don't try to go, oh, if, it's not a recommendation engine. If Andrea liked this song, she'll like that song. If Andrea likes sushi, she'll want green tea. This is a completely different way of looking at data. And of course, they did lots of testing. And this is what I call, for a whole other webinar, emerging available market. When I taught Lean Startup, we taught TAM and SAM, the total available or addressable market, and the things that are kind of in our line of sight. But this was really a way that I believe ecosystems can work well. And I think that AI will help us even more. They went from donuts for downloads to a bicycle sandwich delivery system, to Rappi Favor, to an app, to Rappi Pay. And when I first started working with banks in Mexico, Rappi Pay was like a tiny little sidebar. Now it's a core backbone, and it's a multi-channel application. To travel. And now they're branching out into music and live events and games. They're not doing it. The reason people trust it is because they earned it. Here's the secret. You cannot leave this session without understanding. This could have been a bunch of companies who felt co-opted in a negative way by Rappi. They acquired us and they ruined us, or they took our culture, or they just took all of our customers. And no. The secret is that they allow each of these to thrive as their own networks, as their own flywheels, as their own even ecosystems. And so each of these companies is connected to Rappi, but not constrained by Rappi. And so they maintain independence and interdependence. And there's way more to the story. The thought is, You go from an app, hacemos tu vida más fácil, where your life is more easy, to now perhaps being able to order, I don't know, we were doing Taylor Swift tickets these days, and having a whole concert experience. And that's the way that you follow data in a non-traditional way and look at ecosystem possibilities. Now, remember the picture that we showed before of flywheels? It's possible that you have to make new friends, the same way that Cargill might make new friends with some beer people. They must be very different cultures in our country. People who ferment beer are not necessarily the same as a buttoned up set of chemists in a Cargill laboratory. And so that's part of the beauty, is for us to be able to honor the other people and to learn a lot. So here's my summary is, first of all, it's based on trust and permission. These data insights are quite valuable, but you can't do it in day to day. So I recommend that everybody involved in an ecosystem have a sort of mastermind group. And I run a few of these. It's not a commercial, but how do you step back and say, oh, how's the water? Well, what is our water right now, right? Cross-sector openness, no, I don't know anything about beer. Well, maybe we should learn something about beer, right? Maybe we should learn something about travel tickets. We can't just put on a new sweater and say that we've got a whole new personality. We need to have a situation where everyone wins. We don't want to be, taking over their, their company and making them lose customers. There needs, as I showed you with Rappi, to be an entrepreneurial responsiveness. The culture of these companies is critical. The concept of getting good at co-creation is not something I was taught in business school. And, once again, for another day, when somebody can help me with the actual math of chaos theory, the multiplier effect is it's much more complex and powerful than a network effect.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrea. I love the sushi to airline ticket. It's kind of the ultimate upselling, isn't it?
It is beyond that. It is exactly. So I agree. It's like, that is upselling on steroids, because upselling is green tea, right? That is for sure. Upselling is, can you also be on our payment system? Upselling is, can you get our credit card? But I don't know what we should call it. Let's think of a word, Stuart, and write an article about it. It's like, I don't know what you call it, but it's something where it's like a completely different concept that comes in because of the data. The data showed that was testable. They tested it and validated it, obviously, and it turned out to be shockingly powerful.
Frank Karlberg from Switzerland makes a point. How does a person find out what he or she needs? So I suppose there's two sides to that. How do you actually know what you need? In a world of fast changing technology, it's difficult to articulate that. And how does the company figure out what you need?
Okay, so Frank, we have got to talk, because my very, very first discipline was market research. And I almost got fired because I told my boss that we were doing focus groups. This was a very long time ago. And it was Procter & Gamble things. So it was like Cheer versus Tide, and we would ask, in those days, it was housewives. This is a very long time ago. Which do you prefer, Cheer or Tide? And everybody would laugh and say, ha, 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 I actually wish I had a cleaning service. And that was a joke. So we weren't allowed to record that. And I said, I actually think there's something to all of these off the record comments. And I'm not claiming credit for this, nor did I invent it, but they did go on to develop cleaning services for college campuses, right? So you could, and also if there was a natural disaster, there was something called Tide for Community or something. And, they would come up with a mobile truck and wash all your clothes. So it was a joke, but it wasn't really a joke. And so I have a whole list, which I'm happy to share with you, of how to discern unmet needs, and do not ask the customer. I love Germany. It's a wonderful place to work. I remember someone from Siemens confronting me saying, well, you need to have a consistent survey that you ask everybody, or this is not valid. And I said, actually, a consistent survey will only tell me what people already know. We need to discover what is emerging. And so that will not be able to be captured on a survey. So Frank, I would love to talk with you more about how first of all, you have a hunch, right? People call it hypothesis. I call it hunch. And then you have to test it. I mean, there were probably 50 things that came out of the data. kind of like recommendation engines. If Andrea liked this song, will she like that song? Well, you thought that my genome was, I like female singers, so you gave me another female singer. But actually, the reason I like that song is because I played it at my wedding. So my wedding playlist would be the right place to go next. So a deeper conversation, that the simple answer is you have to have hunches. You have to have a cross group network of, a cross ecosystem group of people that have a specific task to look at data, reflect on it, hypothesize, and then test and validate the test and learn that I learned from McDonald's, test and learn, test and learn. So I hope that helps you, Frank.
Jose, thank you very much. He's provided a link of the butterfly effect of RAPI. That's very useful, Jose. Thank you very much. Somebody on LinkedIn says, what are the questions you ask yourself when looking at data differently? What are your points of entry? I think you kind of just answered that really, Andrea, haven't you?
The real point of entry is, just like with blind spots and biases, I do a whole week-long thing on blind spots and biases. We don't know what they are. And so I absolutely 100%, I have 4 quadrants of people. There are the social engagement, lean forward people. There are the big picture people. I invite actuaries and operations people, people who are not, quote, creative, research, technology. You need to look at things from a very broad scale. And the other thing I've been doing lately is children, people who are very, very different generation, because I've also found that, and of course, always cross-cultural. If we're doing cross-cultural work, it's amazing to me how many unmet needs we can determine. And then, as I said, the way we actually do it is with a hypothesis, not we're not trying to be right the first time. We're trying to test and learn, which is part of the agile approach. And so once you have some hypotheses, there's nothing more humbling than me being 100% sure that we can go into the airline market and then finding out that there's absolutely no market for it. And there's probably 99 out of that 100 that ended up on the cutting room floor.
Okay. 3 strategies. What should
there's 3.
What can they do?
Okay. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm working with a new leaders course. I'm super excited. We've got all the videos and now we're working on the book. It should be out in a couple of months. That's envision, expand, build. That's where I've lived for many, many years. And I think most people know it. I have a twist on it. But it's engage and activate that people get wrong. And that's where we've fallen short. And so there are 3 strategies. Number 1, I live in the land of elevator pitches. I live in the land of telling a story and narrative. And, we've all learned this. But what we try to do wrong is we try to make people heroes of my story. Don't you want to be part of RAPI? It's an amazing platform. It's, this. And it's like, wait a minute, they've got their own story going. So the most important mindset, and I know you're going to ask me how you do this, how do you make a person a hero of their own story? And so, for instance, in a project we did for a very large mobility company in China, there was a story about cybersecurity and biometrics that we told in the United States in a certain way. And that was not making the Chinese engineers heroes of their own story, because the whole concept of security and cybersecurity is so different within that cultural perspective. And so what we had to do was understand that the peer-to-peer authentication was so embedded in the Chinese culture as a good thing to have, whereas in the US, it's a little bit of a, we call it big brother, but it's a very different mindset. And so how do we make the Chinese engineers heroes of their story? Not, don't you want to do security our way? Totally different attitude, totally different level of respect. And so we need to embed our narrative into their narrative. And I won't get into all of it, but there's always an ask, and that's for another day. The second of 3 is to align expectations. So the other day, as we mentioned, that, we said to everybody in this workshop, it was from Copenhagen Business School, and they were visiting Silicon Valley. And we also had a biotech company from San Diego in the room. And we said, okay, let's draw how you perceive a metaphor for an ecosystem. Like, what do you want to, once again, what's your value? What's the value that you want from this ecosystem, right? And some said flywheels. I want to be able to keep my system going while I participate in this other. Some were biological, like the rainforest, or, I want to keep my petri dish and the plants will grow and my mushrooms will help this tree. And, they had a mindset. A butterfly effect. I realized that if I do this, change the code, then this developer 3 million miles away and in, whatever, might be affected by it. Network of networks. That's a very typical way. I'm not saying it's bad, but that's a typical way I see people drawing it, mostly because a lot of people start out with like drawing programs that do it this way. So, you're kind of limited by Microsoft of like how you can conceptualize this. I had a great friend, Robert Gierke, who might be here actually, from House of Beautiful Business, who went to a Lisbon aquarium and saw fish, doing different things. And it's like, oh yeah, like they are all in different swim, schools. And so we had them draw it. And I love the fact that, this could not be more different. If I say, Stuart, why don't you draw me a picture of the expectations you have from this ecosystem? Okay. If you're expecting the one on the left, and then you get like a football game, or you get a conglomerate, or you get a butterfly effect, or you get, I don't know what Nilo did, but, something, with, it looks like a game, flywheels, biological, the rainforest. And, oh my goodness, so easy to get confused. Your flywheel is not serving my butterfly, basically. And the final one is, you have to be able to have bold success without central control. And I am, as my children have told me, I have a preference for control. And so therefore, you have to let it go and realize that even if I'm not in control of everything, it's good for everybody. And ultimately, you need to get others to influence others. And I mean influence in a very positive way.
We're running out of time, Andrea. So what are the leadership imperatives? Let's finish.
Yeah, number one is that you have to understand that for initiating, engaging, and sustaining, you need to be very good at very different things. And people get confused. They initiate thinking that that's automatic sustaining. It is not. People do not engage with you for the same reason that you initiate. Oh, let's solve home health care. That's great. Day one, everybody's jumping up and down. Day two, people get pretty darn busy. And so how do you engage? And once again, the way that you initiate is you have huge purpose. You curate the participants well. You get people who get it. You establish trust. But then you need to, for engaging, completely different. Doing the same elevator pitch for engagement is not going to work. I know this because I have 13,000 plus teams of experience. People have to be heroes of their own story. And you need to work on activation, not just nodding their heads, but actually doing things. Sustaining is where we really have to do a lot of work as a strategy practice globally, because curating the experience, and this gets back to something that Tammy was saying earlier, it's generative. And we don't even realize when a new standard has come, right? It's kind of like Twitter versus Threads. Like all of a sudden, everybody was looking for something we didn't even know we were looking for. So how do you create collective value over time? And once again, this is the only time I will explain that this is part of a longer course. This will get you into it. There are free videos. I would be very pleased for you to look at. And there's one on each of these elements. And this is also tools that you can use. You can download them. I think Stuart's happy to share this. Start with yourself in the circle. And then literally, these are all elements that you can play around with so that it's more of an ecosystem and less of a network. This is another tool you can use to take to your teams Monday morning and just talk about which elements your ecosystem needs to look like. This is an assessment for you to use with your teams. And finally, the summary of this is, that we've talked about 3 flavors, we've talked about examples, some strategies, but most of all, it's doing something. And so I would love 2 questions in chat. One is, what is one key takeaway? And I would love. This is Oosterdøner, and I pronounce it terribly. It's a Danish food delivery company, which I love. And they do boxes of food, and they have them for takeaway as well. So what is one key takeaway from today? And let Stuart kind of monitor what your big aha has been, or just some fact that was valuable to you. And also, I wanted to thank Tammy and Frank and Michael and Matt and Jose for your contributions. That was just brilliant.
Yes, some great questions. Thank you to everyone who joined. It'd be good if you thought about what your one takeaway from today is, and hopefully what you're going to put into practice when you get back to work, and put all these ideas about ecosystems to work. Alexandra from Denmark says, improved understanding of the difference between network and ecosystem. Thank you. Which I think is spot on. Thank you, Alexandra. Think about it and let us know. We're happy to share Andrea's fantastic slides. And if you want to know more about her work, go to her website. And your website is, Andrea?
It's www.summa, S like Sam, U, M like Michael, A.com. Summa.com.
So seek out Andrea's work. Thanks, Tammy. She says, the way you frame mutual trust and alignment, embed your narrative in their narrative, make them heroes of their own stories. Good points. Hendro says the 3 Ps, profit, platform, purpose. Quite right. Lots to think about. Emerging available markets will stick with me. Sushi to airline tickets. What an example. Check that one out. Andrea Kates, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us from throughout the world. We'll be back with you very soon. Thank you.
Great to be with everyone. Thanks, Stuart.